Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we talk about how writing works, how writers work, and how the best writers risk being strange. And I'm talking today with Jonathan Chance, who's one of my label mates, as it were, at Heavy Metal's Virus Comics imprint. I've done a comic series there called The Eye Collector. Jonathan has a graphic novel out, which I really recommend to you. It's called The Boy Who Conquered a Mountain. And it is Samurai Kaiju Horror. So those three great words that go great together. So let's just dive right in to talking to Jonathan Chance. I'm here talking to Jonathan Chance, who is the writer and the creator of The Boy Who Conquered a Mountain, the graphic novel out of Heavy Metal's Virus Comics imprint. And the artist on that book is Emilio Utrera. And it's a really great it's a really great story about these characters who it cycles around a lot of things that I hold dear. Samurai, right? The kaiju. You've got a very Lovecraftian kind of strain to the kaiju as well. We were just talking briefly before I started recording about how you were also a filmmaker, right. And I've done a bunch. The first thing I really kind of did, my first paid writing job, I interestingly was to write these samurai films for this guy. Me and a co-writer, I wrote 4 samurai feature films, one of which was actually had Cary Haruka Tagawa was attached to it for a while. It never ended up getting made, unfortunately, but he was kind of coming off Mortal Kombat and Mortal Kombat and other things. And he, this would be in like a starring vehicle for him and things like that. But anyway, fortunately, it never all panned out, but it was, I'm right. I haven't published any samurai stuff, but I've done, quite a bit of writing for samurai stories, interestingly. And that's cool. And then another kind of link that we have is, of course, I also have a comic coming out with Heavy Metal and their Virus Comics imprint. Mine's The Eye Collector, and it's, a mini series, whereas you've got a full-on graphic novel here. Right. And then the other great connection that we have is we both not only are named Jonathan, but correctly spell the name Jonathan, right? Right. So I was just wondering if you can maybe talk a little bit about how you sort of came to write this story and how you hooked up with Heavy Metal.
Right. Oh, well, basically, I was seeing that the kaiju stories were starting to kind of surface, and I must admit, I was thinking at the time, that the modern kaiju story has been done. I mean, it's been done so many different ways. So thinking, if this is a popular thing right now, I can, I'm interested in doing this. But I want to do it differently, and I want to do something that I can get passionate about. If I'm not passionate about the story, it will show. The story won't be very good. I won't have the passion into the story and everything. So, so I started thinking about why not set it in a time that would be more believable. In an ancient time with myths and magic and something that was a little dear to my heart, because I grew up, when I was younger, I did martial arts. I did ninjutsu, jujitsu, kung fu, and I was that young, sensitive, gawky kind of kid that, wasn't the biggest kid in the class. He was the smallest and the weakest. So I think there's a bit of me in that. And in this story, I was thinking, it was also allegorical as well for what I was going through. And how could I do a story where someone who could seem like someone that couldn't fight or wasn't strong enough could actually become something greater than he could possibly imagine. And in this story, the kaiju story was a good idea, I thought, in this setting, in this period. So it's a period piece meets coming of age fantasy action story. And I thought, I'm always trying to do something different. If at least you can't do a completely different story or something that hasn't been done before, at least do it in a different way. And I thought, why not be, in this wonderful, exciting time. It's very atmospheric and very innocent. And the kaiju story, I'm thinking, why hasn't that been done before in this period of time? And and it could be believable, at least in a time like this, with fantasy and everything. And then I was really into the whole Japanese folklore. So the creature is kind of like a almost like an oni demon, which is in the Japanese folklore is what that is. So this creature is a beast, kaiju, oni, demon creature. I'm thinking, so I was trying to do something really different there as well.
Talk a bit more about just what the story is and what the creature is a little bit, without maybe spoiling too much. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the creature design and how you developed and fleshed out some of the things that creature does, like in terms of the kind of the way its connection to the volcano and so on.
Yeah, I thought that this would make a great idea because you don't quite see where the beast is or where it's come from or really what's caused what happens. This young boy, he's a sensitive boy. He has a precognition of things that are going to occur, and then his whole village the next day is wiped out by a volcano. We have no idea how it really happened. And then I'm reminded of the images of like Pompeii, where people are turned to stone, and we assume it's the volcano, and is devastated. And I really want to show that human nature part, the spirituality of how does someone that already was weak to begin with, already sensitive and young and unexperienced or inexperienced, to then find the strength to not only go on, but also to fight something that's so much greater than he is. With the beast, I wanted it to definitely be demonic in a way, terrifying, and the arms and legs, I wanted it to be almost kind of human-like. It's like a spider type shape, but I wanted it to be almost human-like, where the hands and fingers are like fingernails, and something we haven't quite seen before. And I was thinking, there's all kinds of kaiju. Most of them are Godzilla-like or giant bug-like. I was thinking, yes, it's kind of spider-like, but I was thinking, I was talking with Emma Uchuru's fantastic artist working with me through the whole thing, really bringing the vision together for what I was trying to create. Just something we haven't seen before, but something that we'd find really terrifying from our nightmares, I think, or something like that.
And the other thing I think is kind of a real influence on it, although it's maybe less obvious, is like a manga style. It's not quite a manga style, but it has moments and shades of that. And so I'm just kind of curious to know some of your other, just kind of, I guess you say, literary influences in terms of developing this story, or even just how you and your artists were kind of communicating around some of the art style.
Yeah, this is the thing. A lot of the artists, because I've worked on different stories before, often artists I work with are from a different country. Some of the most fantastic artists you'll find are literally under the surface, and they haven't been even fully discovered yet, or they're just starting to bring out wonderful things, or they haven't broke through here. It's very difficult, as you know, to break through over here. But I would write the script. I would storyboard out everything, because that's the filmmaker part of me. I would storyboard out all the close up of the character, medium close up, long shot, what I wanted to show, details. We have to keep count of all the characters' looks and what they were wearing and what's happened, continuity. And then I would always, not only with the script, we'd also talk about the storyboards, that if there's anything different that he would want to do with that, or to show it more in a comic book professional way than what I was drawing, because my sketches are more filmmaker mind, cinematic thinking, transfer that over to comics. And then with that, we would go forward, and I would make notes on certain things, the type of expressions that I wanted the children to have, or him, or what they were going through, and we'd be very backwards and forwards. Everything was via Instagram, email, and I'll just send back notes, and then he'd get back. We were very quick on getting back, and this actually started originally off as a 40-page story. It was basically going to be around about 40 pages. He'd come on board for that, and the more I was writing it, the more I was thinking, I can't cut this short, and I can't, we're building something here. Something's really building in the momentum. And if I cut it short now, I'll give the story a disservice. I'd give, all these characters that we're building with here. And there's so many, so I let it flow. And it became something bigger than we both thought it was going to be, and I was always wanted it to be epic, and it became more epic than that. But Emmy at the time was a little upset because he thought we were only going to do 40 pages, so we ended up doing 75. But it became something definitely, I think, like I said the word earlier, cinematic. It does seem like almost like a feature kind of story almost. Influences for me, definitely. I mean, it's unavoidable. You can't miss it. Seven Samurai. Not directly. I mean, you can see with like the village, the town, some of the characters. I always try to do something original, but obviously Akira Kurosawa is just such a fantastic director, and some of that is definitely an influence in there. And thankfully, Emi Uchiura has actually had seen the Seven Samurai as well, so we were both on the same page for the look and feel of what this was going to become.
And then I'm curious to know, again, I've done some filmmaking and some screenwriting, but not as much as you, of course. But so what I'm kind of really curious to know how you think about approaching a story differently, either as a filmmaker or as a comic writer, but also just sort of what cross connections you think there kind of are there. Like, do you like I guess my kind of question here is sort of when you're sitting there storyboarding out a film or storyboarding out a comic in this manner that you're talking about, is there a way that you kind of have to think about it differently, or is there even just a value in kind of doing it to show off the idea to producers? Like I'm curious to know how you kind of how those two areas kind of cross-pollinate.
Yeah, I think it's funny, you can't take the filmmaker part out of you. I mean, I think if you've I got the bug early on for that. I mean, I've always wanted to be kind of, in a sense, a storyteller, but the filmmaking part, every aspect of that was always fascinating to me. And I think the storyboard part of it just further accents, I think, what you're trying to express on the page when you give that over to the artist, how you want to transfer that. You're always trying to, the heart of it, you want the artist to obviously have free reign to do what they want to do, but you also want to reel it in a bit because you have a particular vision you want it to show. I think I did wonder how it was going to be doing comic books compared to films. And funny enough, the transition was quite natural. I actually found, surprisingly. I think when I was doing the storyboards and the scripts and that, at the same time, the way you write panels is literally the same as writing storyboards. For shots, for shots and angles is basically almost exactly the same as doing panels. And then the comic book professional artist then will make it more in a comic book sense. You can do those same types of shots, but it still has to be in a comic book format and the mode that they go into with that. I think, and at the same instinct, I think, again, I'm not, with my stories, I don't try to put out to producers that this could be a movie or this could be a short film. But I think there's just a part of me that the way when I pick artists and colorists and the type of look that I want and the atmosphere and everything, it kind of just comes out that way. And then I look at it and I think, shit, well, this could be a Twilight Zone episode, or this could be, a movie. The more it goes on, I'm thinking, I hope you can take that out of yourself. I think that filmmaker part of you is just in there.
What I've found, just sort of, having done both of them a little bit, is I feel like the grammar of them is different, almost opposite, but kind of related. Like the way I think, like Tarkovsky's, because the film, the shot is the grammar, right? The shot's the basic component, and then Tarkovsky pointed out, the shot is sort of like sculpting in time. You've got time playing out in the shot, and then you're cutting to another shot where the time plays out. Whereas in comics, time doesn't play out in the panel, right? It plays out in the gutter between the panels. So in a sense, it's almost the opposite. But of course, as you're saying, I write the scripts almost identically, and also you're talking about close and this, the angles and the visuals. Of course, they're just these visual mediums. Although film has the sound component as well, but they're in some ways they're opposites. In some ways they're very connected. What I've found interesting about it, though, is I don't know how to necessarily talk about one transitioning to the other. Like I can see in my head about it, but like what I'm curious to know if you found that it is helpful or not to have, say, like that comic thing. Like if you're in a pitch meeting, say, you're talking about maybe trying to take this thing and make it into a film, do you find that it helps to have those materials? Does it help people visualize it, or does it kind of get them locked into a one way of thinking about it that is maybe not like, what have you found in your experience, and how have you kind of handle, I guess, kind of pitching off comics, if that makes sense?
Well, that's actually something I've been wanting to do. Actually, I haven't actually got round to actually doing that. I've used storyboards for a film I was trying to get off the ground to get funding for. Since then, I've actually made a prequel short story based on a character from the same from that movie that I was going to make. So I was actually going to use that, and I think with things like this, I think they only help, to be honest, to fully visualize what it could be. I think that they can put their mind aside just enough to see that, yes, this is a comic book, but they can get at least an idea visually on a bigger picture, like, oh, I can imagine this being a movie. And if it's cinematic enough looking, if the comic book, I think, has a certain, if it's done a good enough way, quality wise, they can just see that, oh yes, I could totally see the potential of this being a movie or something else. I think it only helps, because when you've just got the script and you've got some storyboards, which is nice, but it's not color and all this, but when you actually see a story all played out, and if you had that even on a big screen, I think that from those images they'd be able to see you've got vision for what what this could be. I think it only help it for sure.
Some ways that you have found, whether you're talking to producers or talking to an artist, like whatever you found useful in terms of conveying your vision for things? Because before obviously storyboards you're finding is a useful tool, but are there other things like that where you find like they're good tools for kind of getting that vision across? Because sometimes it can be hard to just kind of communicate what you're seeing in your head to either the artist who's got to draw it, or a producer that maybe you're trying to get some money from or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. And I think also the other thing is that I'm always dealing with is language barrier as well. So you can speak as clearly as possible and yet think, oh, wait a second, I'm talking to, like, in a personable way. I'm not I'm not writing it clear enough in words that are easy to understand. So I think I also use the script. I try to be, they do say with scripts in general that you shouldn't be too detailed, but with certain things I do put, a little bit of detail, especially at the beginning if I'm explaining what a character's like or the setting or whatever. Then after that, it's not as detailed. But I'm always giving tidbits of information. Like every time, like I would say, oh, I like the look of, all these of this panel, whatever, but this one I'd like to be bigger, or this needs more detail. And I think as long as you're saying directly, and not in a bad way at all, but just in a direct kind of way what you're after, and also I use images as well. You can find images online of particular things that you can also help. I would like a woodland that looks like this, and you've got the atmosphere of of it being like this creepy, crowded look, and the feel of it, and the time of the day, and things like that. So you can use those as visuals as well as your storyboards and your writing as well.
You keep a file of that stuff? Like if you see like a film that has a cool woodland, or an interesting mountain,
yeah.
do you have like a swipe file for stuff like that, or do you just keep it in your head? Or
no, my Dropbox is full of just I will screen capture something I like the look of, or, if I see something, or if then I also go out of my way to go online and Google search and just look for particular images involving things that I'm looking for. Like recently, I'm doing a story right now. It's set in California summer 1992. I want to get that type of look of not Venice Beach, but more Newport Beach. So then you specifically look up that look, and you're trying to get, and yet there's still the angle's not quite right, and you're like, well, if I draw it this way, I can use that as well. And so I think images online and that are definitely good to do that. And I've just put a bunch of folders in my Dropbox, and then also I've always been someone that just constantly writes notes. I write on paper. I used to write on napkins and hands, but I've stopped doing that now. That used to be, I don't know if you ever saw that movie Almost Famous. You ever seen that movie?
Yeah, not for a while, but yeah.
I was that kid that would write on my hand and it would sweat off, write on the napkins. And so I also have a dictaphone thing. So if you wake up in the morning and you don't have time to write it, or it's going so fast, you can at least get it out just saying it, So.
The problem I've been finding is I make these notes everywhere in all these different ways, like you're talking about, but then I don't have any system to find the note or recall them in any way.
So, I know it's not easy. You have to put it in some sort of a filing. I tend to put all my ideas in one folder, and then seeing the image of it or the screen capture of it will remind me of, okay, I remember what that one was about, and I've made notes on that, or I've spoken into the dictaphone about that, and then I'll put the two together and it will connect, and then remind myself of what the story was about, or the idea. So
one thing I find interesting about this particular story is that the way that you have, the kaiju genre, is kind of playing into that. And you have, this monster and this oversized, all these oversized aspects. And then at the other side of it, you pretty quickly eliminate the adults from the equation. And you have more or less stripping it down to these kids. And it's not, just this main character who has had this vision, as a kind of heroic figure all on his lonesome. He does sort of have a kind of, group around him, right? Like it almost has a bit of that. To me, it has a little bit of that Goonies tone, like
someone said that. One person said that. Yeah, that's funny.
But but I realized that I haven't really seen those two things come together. Like usually with the kaiju, you don't really have like these kids fighting it. You know what I mean? Like, so I thought that was really an interesting kind of wrinkle in things. And you kind of talked a little bit about kind of where you came up with that idea, but I was wondering like what you found interesting as you kind of played that out, for you, like where were you kind of surprising yourself as a storyteller, I guess?
I think it's funny. I look back at, I've done other, I do mainly horror stories than this one. This was definitely a different one for me. It's always the different ones that I do that ends up being the ones that are a bit more popular than the ones that I'm normally doing the things. But with this, I just find that with children, you look back, and I've got a son myself now, he's 6. And you look back and you think, I remember the times when you would ask a doll or a parent or whatever, and they wouldn't believe you, or they didn't believe in you, or they just kind of discarded and put aside, like all the time, and sometimes not on purpose or anything. They're just because they're young and they don't know any better, supposedly. But what's to say that they couldn't be strong and that they couldn't fight something? And I think at the core of this, the story is a very spiritual story. First, for Caleb, overcoming all that he's gone through, and so I wanted to convey in the story that it's as, he's dealing with grief at the same time as transitioning into a transformation of being stronger than something that he'd imagined, and also that he'd be destined to be. That this person at the beginning of the story was so weak, and we know the underdog story, but that anyone could become a leader and could fight for the right thing. I think that was what the core is, and also the innocence of children. I think in stories where the children are the either the heroes or the people that the protagonists, there's that air of the parent part of you, or even before you're a parent, you're like, oh, those poor kids, oh God Christ, they're going to get hurt. What are they going to do? They're crazy. So there's a part of you that really wants to protect them, and yet they're saying, we can do this, and we can stick together, and we can defeat this thing. And I think that's something that in adult stories or in adult comics or movies, that we don't feel that kind of wanting to shield someone as much as we do children.
Yeah, it's got a. I've got an artist friend chasing artwork. He draws under. His name's Justin Curry, and we always notice that he always does like big versus small. Like that's his sort of theme. Is it'll be like a gigantic,
right.
Monstrosity, and then this like little tiny girl
Right.
facing it down, and it's a really compelling aesthetic, because it just suggests so much in terms of just thematic ideas instantly, and it just has an inherent conflict in that kind of opposition, and then as you say, you're kind of sinking it into this demon versus child side of it as well. Like there's just all this cosmic almost suggestiveness or significance to the just to those elements. So it's interesting to me, and it really comes across nicely with this art style. So I know you're not the artist on it, but I'm wondering if you could talk a bit more about how you found this artist and how you find artists. Just as a writer, I'm always who can't draw stick figures. My kid, who's 5 years old, was asking me to draw a Santa Claus for him today, and I tried, and he started like berating me. And he's like, "That's not how Santa Claus looks. That looks like some sort of." That's what he said to me. He goes, "That looks like some sort of like fat gingerbread cookie." And I was like, "Kid, like you can draw a better Santa than me. Why ask me to draw Santa?"
Right.
But
kids are so honest at that age, aren't they? That's the fact. Yeah. There's no filter. They just say, they don't mean it. They just say,
but I'm always looking for artists, like so I'm always trying to figure out like how do you find these guys.
Well, it goes back to that. It goes back to that thinking and what we were just talking about with the putting ideas into folders and Dropbox and physical for writing notes and putting them in a filing cabinet. The same type of thing goes with artists. So the last few years that I've been doing this, this year has just been I've been constantly working, and finally and submitting, and then finally this year, like a few things kind of broke through all at once. I was very happy that finally something had just come through, because after all this, the 2.5 years constantly working. But what I always do since the beginning was, again, I do those screen capture. I see someone that I like the look of their art. I look down at not only what they're capable of doing, but you could find a very wonderful artist, but have they ever done comic books before? And have they ever done positioning and how the panels go and all this? So the more you go on, and the more as I went on with the different stories, it's all trial and error. But you discover, okay, it's got to be someone that can do comic books. They've done comic books. This isn't the first thing they've done before. They've done it a few times. Even if they haven't sold anything, you can see, oh, they know what they're doing. And there's a natural, you can tell with some people. And I've often found people, like I said before, they just happen to be from other countries. Sometimes they're from here, but often they're from other countries. And they've been doing it for a long time. It's just something that you can tell it's in their passion. They just, would want to, get their work out there. And I'm happy to basically find anyone, that's affordable, whether it be, you know, newcomers or industry people, both. But with newcomers, I think they seem to be more excited and really willing to just go the extra mile to really show you what they can do and everything. So that's how I normally go about finding. Like I find them all different websites. Again, Instagram, I'll screen capture ones, and then I'll put them aside. I'll put them all in a folder, and I'll look through them all, and I'll think, okay, well, this particular person is really great at doing gothic stuff, Victorian stuff. So I'm thinking if I did a period horror, this person would be great for that. Or there might be someone similar, and I'll look at both of them. And then there'll be other people that might be really good at doing fantasy stuff, or someone that different that does sci-fi stuff. So I'll decide based on not just, you know, artists can do different things, but if their strengths lie in particular genres and things, I will pick which ones look good and then see if they'd be willing to do the story.
And the other thing I just kind of I'm curious about is how your experience has been so far with heavy metal. Again, I'm putting a comic out with heavy metal right now, and so I've been really, I've been really pleased with them so far.
Your by the way, your story is the type of story I would want to read, by the way, because I'm definitely, because I'm more of a horror background, even though this is more of a fantasy kind of, there's horror elements in it. But I've been doing horror shorts and things like that. So your story is definitely my type of story I would want to read. So
what do you like most about horror? What draws you to that genre overall?
I think I've always been intrigued
because you have horror elements in this too, like the monster.
Oh yeah,
it's kaiju. It's not, as you say, it's more fantasy, but it's a very it's got shades of Lovecraft in that monster.
Yeah. Well, I definitely wanted to put that balance of spiritual and psychic and horror elements and stuff. I just feel like there's so many elements that we know so little about, and there's things in history and myths and that are just fascinating to me, I think. And I wanted to compound that into this, and above all else, I just wanted to do something different, because I'm thinking, if I want to do a kaiju story, why not do it in a different way like this? And it being a period piece, it just instantly there made it so much, I thought, different. But horror in general has always intrigued me. I think it's like that thrill of the roller coaster ride, you know. It's like you know, you're terrified or a little scared of it. I mean, I remember back when I was a kid, the first ever horror movie I saw was the horror Dracula. And I'll never forget this. I've told people in different interviews before. I think I was 5 years old, so I was a year younger than my son. And for some reason, my dad had it on beta video cassette, I think. Somehow I was watching it. I don't know how. And my mum said, "Oh, if you watch that, you'll get nightmares." And I said at the time, "I won't get nightmares." I'm like, "Oh, you'll get nightmares." And because you listen to your mum, I got nightmares. And I said, "Mum, it's only because you told me I was going to get nightmares. I wouldn't have had it otherwise." And after she said, "Oh, I won't say that again then." And she didn't say it again. And after that, I never really ever had nightmares on horror movies. So horror, as far back as that, as 5 years old, I think I kind of knew. I knew that it was story. I knew it wasn't real. And I was always, even back then, looking at, oh, you know, this is kind of cool, blood, vampires and special effects. And, you know, so even back then it was, I think, fascinating. You know, it slowly started to put something in me that I would be interested in that later on in life. And your question of with heavy metal is just, I think it's like an institution, I think, for sci-fi, and not just sci-fi, but sci-fi horror as well. And all the great artists that have come through and worked on stories, pages, cover art. And I remember very early memories. Again, I was probably about 9 or 10. I think it was my brother had a few issues, and it's just those scantily clad covers with normally like a woman, you know, it'd be a science fiction story or fantasy, and the art was just straight from the get-go breathtaking, you know. And I'm a big person for that. You hope that when you open the book, the art inside is as good as the cover art. And often it was with heavy metal, which is the great thing. And the great thing is that now, pardon me, they're just going from strength to strength. I think that they're taking all the elements of the past, which is fantastic. They're embracing that. They're not lost in the middle of it, or kind of enjoying past glories. I think they're embracing the past, but they're also embracing modern stories. And it's so great that they've got this all these creator labels now, where I myself and you could even have our stories, not just a short story, but a big story. In your case, a mini series. In my case, a graphic novel, and actually be a part of that, and which is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I'm weirdly have come to everything as an experimentalist. Like I'm really interested in experimental narrative structures and just strange ways to tell stories. I find horror the most interesting genre as a
Yeah.
avant-garde artist, because horror is a genre where, and especially in film, but elsewhere
Right.
as well, horror is a genre where not only does the audience accept unconventional narrative structures. So they'll watch an anthology film, like they'll watch a some strangely structured thing. They expect something unusual and bizarre. In film specifically, you can still make it's still possible to make a film without a star in horror, unlike other genres.
Oh, absolutely.
And so there's like a way in which it's practically feasible in certain mediums, in a way that it's not in other areas. But also, like, you got an audience that is trained to just want something new and something different, and it's an audience that really is intolerant of repetition in a certain way.
Right.
And so it kind of, I feel like it's a great genre that I love, and for other reasons, but it's also one where I think it's just has an audience that is really uh, has an appetite for and a tolerance of something strange.
Right.
And when you talk about heavy metal, like to me, like that's a company that has done a really great job throughout the years of melding horror, sci-fi, fantasy, like those big genres,
Right.
with experimental art styles and story
True.
structures. Like you had, Jodorowsky, you had Mobius, you have all these great, uh, avant-garde people associated with heavy metal. And as you
Right.
say, like I think it's still sort of where that audience is in many ways, like that kind of weird overlap with the people who like genre but also want something really weird, and
Right.
not
Right.
conventional and not normal, not mainstream, right, in
Right.
that way. So it's, I've always seen myself as kind of in that kind of cult, you know that cult weird, like as a cult author or something, and so to me it's a really interesting set of things that they're doing, and I'm really pleased about it. But the other thing that, as you bring up, is now they've got this creator-owned line of Invirus Comics, and so
Right.
it's a, like with my book, I always, me and the artist co-own it, and we we just, that's what we want to do, and we've been very very happy with kind of how flexible they've been with things, in that
Right.
regard. But the other thing I think that is just worth kind of mentioning in terms of the things you bring up there is horror, I think, is still a place where you can mix genres, because horror in
Right.
many ways is
True.
not a genre but a parasite on other genres.
It kind of is, isn't it? Right. That's good.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So it's just very interesting. I think I like I appreciate how you really kind of um, blended a couple of different influences in a story that is coherent, because so often they aren't when people try to do that.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I think horror, it goes through ebbs and flows. I think I can't remember how long ago he'd said it, but Christopher Lee was saying decades back, before, I think this is even before he kind of was celebrated again, when once he did Sleepy Hollow and Lord of the Rings, he was celebrated, like, finally. But for many decades he was saying, horror is theater. Horror should be respected for being theater, and some of the greatest stories, even back to William Shakespeare and stuff like that, or even like, you know uh, Greek mythology and things like that. There's horror in all these things, and it's like, how is it not respected? How is it not? And then it takes something like Silence of the Lambs to get an Oscar, and then everyone then gloms onto that and copies that type of format and that way of being a horror, big budget, where horror is always at its greatest when it's not big budget, when it's, like you were saying earlier on, a great horror film most of the time doesn't have a star actor. You're absolutely right. Most horror films are the best ones when they're lower budget, practical effects. And the great thing is, I think about now for horror is with the whole ebbs and flows. I think we're finally at this point again where the smart horrors are in again, which is great, which was around when we were probably growing up, 70s and 80s. Had some of the greatest horror stories, horror sci-fi stories that really made you think. It wasn't just moral, there was stuff under the surface there, and I think those will always be the greatest horror stories. So I'm really enjoying that people are respecting it, and also now that you even see, if you think back when Ringu originally came out, the original Ring movie, that was embraced, because I think many horror stories, they were trying to do the big budget production stuff. They were doing the remake of The Haunting with an all-star cast. I'm thinking all-star cast, CGI, big budget, crap. It's just shit, like it's not, it wasn't good compared to you look back at the original. It was a complete masterpiece. It cost no money. And then you look at Ringu compared to The Haunting remake from 1998, and you're like, there's no contest. And I think that opened a small market of people at the time that was willing to watch subtitled horror movies, where at the time people were like, oh, I'm not watching this subtitle. They were just very ignorant, right? But now you'll even see it on a superhero movie or on a Netflix show or whatever, where you'll see the subtitles come up. And I love the fact now that we're not like, oh, I can't be bothered to read this. That I think that we've embraced that more, which is a great thing now that we are a smart audience, and the studio should treat us like a smart audience and stop treating us like we're dumb and actually have smart movies. In this case, now we've got smart horrors, so that's great.
Yeah, and I really appreciate how you bring sort of some of those twists together in this book here, which I've got to let you go because you and I both have to attend to our small children. But people should check out The Boy Who Conquered a Mountain at Heavy Metal. And Jonathan Chance is maybe the best way to find him online is probably his Instagram, which is Jonathan_Chance. And Jonathan is spelled the correct way, Jonathan.
That's right.
But it's been a pleasure talking to you, and hope to talk to you again sometime.
You too.
Thanks, and keep writing the wrong way.